Kia ora, my little Aspie and Askie friends. So back with episode 2 of this new series. So there was a little trailer episode, then we had an introduction, and now we're getting stuck into the meat of things. Okay, so first, the previous episode we talked a little bit about the terminology, what we mean by an Askie. So essentially, just to recap, I'm talking, my audience. I'm recognizing that not everybody in my target audience, which is people of above average IQ who are also on the autistic spectrum, not all of them have Asperger's or what was called Asperger's. There's another condition which is controversial, very under-recognised, and it's something that I identify with more than the Aspergic diagnosis. And that's called pathological demand avoidance syndrome, or PDA for short. So when I use the word Askies, it's an inclusive term which I have created, nothing to do with Arthur Askey or people who ask lots of questions and are very asky. It's to do with just acknowledging that, really, and acknowledging that there's a wider understanding of the autistic spectrum than perhaps is normal in the mainstream. So, and I also had a bit of a rant last time about how I think it's an underdiagnosed condition. There's lots more things I could say about it. And remember that I've done another series on neuro-diversity, which covers some similar material. So what I wanted to do, so today's episode, I still haven't quite decided on the title. My working title was Aspies, Askies, and How Not to Be an Arsehole. Maybe I'll call it Aspies, Askies, and Arseholes and just get the alliteration in there. So to kind of preamble that, and I was going to put this into the introduction, but I decided it fitted more here, is I think that people on the autistic spectrum fall into two categories. Now, this isn't anything research-based, this is just through clinical and personal observation. And I think this is really interesting. Okay, so I think people on the autistic spectrum clearly have communication difficulties and difficulties in reading people, difficulties with social skills, which is the whole purpose of this series. There are, I think, people fall into two camps, really. People that are kind of aware of that and are therefore potentially quite shy, quite awkward, quite tentative. I said that in a tentative way then, didn't I? With a upwards inflection at the end, which is kind of quite appropriate. And there are people who are less aware, less self-aware, and have stronger personalities, and are the opposite, who are not tentative, who can be kind of little human bulldozers, really. And I think, and that's what my observation is, that people on the spectrum fall into one or two of these camps. Okay, so often the shy, more introverted, quiet, awkward, tentative, uncomfortable, underconfident type. I guess they're probably the ones that struggle the most, really. But the confident bulldozer type are the ones that kind of cause problems for other people the most. So I guess this video is probably aimed more at the bulldozer type, but I think both kind of subtypes will kind of benefit from some of this stuff, really. And I'd be really interested in what your thoughts are on this. Okay. So some of the subjects I'm going to talk about are things in other episodes are things like picking up cues for an ending of a conversation or a meeting, and how not to bore people. Okay, so there's a kind of big overlap with all these kind of subjects. But the kind of person and I talked in my introduction video about some unpleasant personal experiences of people on the spectrum who have really bent my ear, or have sometimes been incredibly insensitive, very poor listening, and I've come away feeling not seen as a human being. That's the thing. And I think this tends to happen more with the I need to find a better name, but this is kind of quite a new working theory, really, which I'm going with, really. So we need to find a kind of a non-pejorative name for both of these types, really. At the moment, I'm kind of thinking awkward and bulldozer, and that's not so good, is it, really? So maybe overconfident and underconfident. Okay, that's quite good. We'll go with that for now. So the overconfident Aspie stroke Askie delivers things to you with high energy, often speaking very loudly. Both types can be prone to not listening. Both types don't kind of always pick up on social cues that maybe like somebody's bored. Another common trait of people on the spectrum is to talk at people rather than to them. So sometimes people on the spectrum, they can sound, their voice can sometimes sound quite rehearsed. You know, it doesn't always sound like a natural, spontaneous speech. It can sound like quite rehearsed, like somebody's presenting a TED talk or something. The other thing with people on the spectrum is sometimes the voice can be quite monotonous. You know, which doesn't come into the category of kind of rudeness, but so if somebody's kind of talking at you, often not with much awareness of volume. So I've spoken to people. I mean, for example, I've met with clients in small consultation rooms that are echoey. I don't know if you can hear the kind of echoiness of this room. And they've had very loud, deep, resonant voices, and they've not actually modulated their voices. They've talked at the same volume that they would speak in another situation, their outdoor voice probably, and had no awareness that actually, the sound was resonating. Kind of there was strong echo in the, it was actually, quite painful at times, the sheer volume and the lack of awareness. So really where people on the spectrum are rude comes from, it doesn't come from, they're not assholes. I suppose what I say is don't appear like an asshole. They're not assholes, but they can appear so because of the lack of sensitivity, lack of listening, and lack of kind of recognizing or seeing the other person. And I guess, a couple of examples of this. This is kind of, I would put this under the category of rudeness, but it's kind of an insensitivity. Is I once had a colleague who, I turned up for work in the morning, often not in the best of mind states or the best of physical. I used to drink back then, so I might come in with a terrible hangover, feeling really down, or I might have had a flu, or I might have had a migraine coming on, and would just immediately greet me with some kind of questions and some dialogue about a work issue, and not good morning, how are you? That is one of the other tendencies of people on the spectrum is they can be very sensitive. I'm very sensitive, but for a start, if somebody starts talking to me and they haven't said good morning, that gets my back up from the very beginning. And I think it's always good practice to ask somebody how they are before you talk to them. And this is something, I think as people on the spectrum we're very bad at. So this would be my first top tip, is before engaging with somebody on business or on some matter of import or some subject, check in how they are. Okay, because if they're not in a good place, you need to modify how you relate and speak to them. Okay, or you might need to completely drop what you were going to say and go into something else, or reschedule a meeting. So how are you? Oh, actually, my mother's just died. Okay, puts a whole different complexion on the subject. But I've actually worked with people who are so unaware that you could say that and they would still launch into what they want to talk about, because they've made up their mind that's what they want to talk about. That's what they're going to talk about. Okay, so that's one good example of something that you can quite easily rectify. Really, is always check in with somebody. And don't just say how are you and then not listen. You need to kind of hear what they say. And the other thing as well, which comes off the back of this, it comes under kind of what would be perceived insensitivity. People often say that people on the spectrum don't have empathy, or they have empathy deficits. Now, I don't actually go along with that. I'm not saying that's always entirely untrue, but actually my experience is that a lot of people on the autistic spectrum are incredibly kind, empathic people. Okay. What I think goes on with autism is people don't always know when to be empathic because they don't always understand the nature of somebody else's experience. Okay. Now I'm going to illustrate this with an extreme example. Okay. Just to make the point. Okay. So I go into work and my colleague does say, "Good morning, Mark. How are you?" Hooray. Fan-fucking-tastic, about time. And I say, "Oh, my cat's just died." Okay. Somebody on the autistic spectrum might not really get the full implications of that and how my experience of that might be. Okay, so they might be inclined to say, "Oh, well, never mind," and then start talking about what they're going to say. Okay, so sometimes we need a little bit more information. Okay, sometimes we need to know what that actually feels like to have your cat just died, and it might be as simple as I know what it's like when my dog died, and that was harrowing. So maybe when your cat died, it was similar. But I think sometimes. And I do this a lot, I'm guilty of this, is sometimes somebody will contact me, and particularly by text where you get less kind of, information in terms of voice tone and all that kind of thing. Somebody will say, it can be, I've had some recent examples of this. Somebody will say that, that was it. Somebody messaged me once and said, I've been in town and there's a guy with, shouting and screaming, obviously, talking to himself and, shouting at the traffic and stuff like that. Obviously somebody with, a mental health issue. And I didn't respond in a very empathic way. I was kind of like, okay, because, I've got a background in mental health. I used to be in the police. So, I've kind of, to me, that wouldn't be a big deal. Okay, but to this person it was really distressing, and that's kind of normal, but because my experience is very different, I didn't get that, and I responded in a, not in a particularly kind of caring or sympathetic or inquiring way, because I just didn't get how the effect to that person might have been so different to the effect that I had. So what I do now is actually, the answer to this is actually just ask very direct questions. This is what I do now. If somebody, and this is kind of, coming from a counselling perspective, I'm kind of used to asking people how they feel and what things mean to them, what the meaning, So now I'll say, well, how was that for you? Or how did that affect you? Or how's that left you? I'll respond with when I think to, and I still make mistakes, okay? Because otherwise I can come across as really cold, insensitive, don't care, arsehole. Really, and I think another example as well. I remember once when I was when I was a young sort of teenager, I was part of a kind of wargaming fraternity when nobody used the word Aspie then, and we didn't have a clue really, but we were all on the spectrum to different degrees. And I was I was kind of picnicking with a guy that was much more had much stronger autistic presentation than me. And I'd been paddling in this river. He was sitting by the river kind of picnicking or reading a book or something like that. And I'd actually trodden on this glass bottle in the river and came back and said, I've cut my foot. And he didn't look up from his book. And not always being the most patient of people, I did remonstrate with him about this. And his reply was very calmly I could see you were all right. Whereas to me, if somebody said I'd cut my foot, or I've stepped on a bottle, I'd be, oh my God. So sometimes I get it right. So I think we need to be kind to ourselves. Like I say, we're using the arsehole. We're not arseholes, but we can come across like arseholes so easily, really. So we need to make extra effort to tune into people. And sometimes we have to just ask very direct questions to find out how they are, how they're feeling. Other people will just pick this up automatically, they pick it up a mile off. I mean, I do. This is the great irony, really, is that on many levels I'm very, very intuitive, very tuned into people, very, very perceptive. And on other levels I have gaps and I miss things. Okay. And that actually serves me well in my professional work, because it's actually far better to ask somebody what they're feeling and ask them to explain it, and keep asking them until I have a really good understanding of it, rather than making assumptions. That helps the other person to kind of identify what they're feeling and explore it and go. So it actually works very well in the therapy room. So I suppose the overriding nutshell, really, of this is check in with people, ask questions, find out how people are, before, and don't just respond in as the bulldozer. Okay, don't just respond in that way. I mean, I could say so much more about this stuff, really, and so this may go into a two-part. I have to keep the videos quite short because I can only upload short videos onto YouTube. So I think what we're going to do, we're going to do an episode 2 of inverted commas arsehole. We're going to come back to a few of the other areas associated around rudeness. Okay, so don't go away. And if you can't find the videos, there will be a playlist with all the videos that focus on neuro-diversity, which would include the autism ones. But if you subscribe and click the bell icon, you will get a notification of when they are uploaded, so you don't have to kind of search around on my channel looking for them. So I will be back very, very soon to launch straight back in where we started, Rangi Mario.